I would like to call the school board meeting for July 9th, 2019 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Bradley? Ms. Langford?
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn?
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle? Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Here.
Ms. Anderson?
The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Caldwell-Johnson, second by Bradley. Please vote.
I don't have my computer.
Motion passes 5-0. Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes for June 19th. June 19th, 2019. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes? June 18th, sorry.
Second.
Motion by Langford, second by Barron. Please vote. Motion passes 5-0. Next on the agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Bradley, do you have the motion?
Yes, I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $12,313,551.90.
Thank you. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 5-0. Next on the agenda is item E1, open enrollment late applications for denial. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the item?
Yes. On your agenda tonight are 2 late applications for denial. These are by state code open enrollment applications out of district for whom the application was made late, and we can make exceptions to those under certain circumstances, and these are the 2 that were deemed not adequate to meet the special exceptions.
May I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment late applications listed for item E1?
Second.
Okay, motion by Caldwell-Johnson, second by Bradley. Any discussion or questions? Any speakers? Okay. Please vote. Motion passes 5-0. Next on the agenda is E2, open enrollment appeals for denial. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, this is the same as the previous item, except these are timely applications, and these have been denied because they do not meet the special exceptions as dictated by law and our diversity plan.
Okay, may I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment appeals listed?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Caldwell-Johnson, second by Barron. Any speakers? Any discussion or questions? Please vote. Motion passes 5-0. Next on the agenda is E3, Student Expectations Policy Revision. This is a discussion item. It's a draft of student expectations revised to align with our newly adopted SMART goals and the SEL priority. I guess I would open it up to the board for any discussion around thoughts, concerns, suggestions, or questions.
I don't have any. I think it's consistent with those things that we've discussed, and I think it creates the right opportunity for accountability for the board.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I would just like to offer that I think this is a clarifying document for the staff. I think it spells things out much more clearly and aligns what the board priorities are in a much more easily understandable and directive avenue. So I think it's really good.
Thank you. Okay. So this will be on the next agenda for action. Thank you. Okay, next is E4, naming request for a ropes course at Stowe Elementary. This also is a discussion item. And we, again, need an ad hoc committee for this to look into it and make a recommendation to the board. So
I'd volunteer.
thank you. One more. Okay. So if you all can look into that and have something before the next meeting, which
Who is it?
is
It's Terry.
August. Yeah, Terry, Rob, and Dwana.
Okay, I will send you three, the relative policy. It's a little, it's not problematic, but it's not completely clean.
Okay.
I think I think it's gonna be fine, but I just want you to be aware of how the policy reads, and we may want to consider making a policy that clarifies a couple of things that are just a little wonky, just because something like this hadn't been anticipated when those policies were created.
Okay.
Thank you. And our next meeting is August 13th, so something to back up to that. Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda is E5, naming request for Roosevelt High School gym floor. And at our last meeting, we had an ad hoc committee that volunteered of Anderson, Delagardelle, and Langford to review the request and make a recommendation. And Ms. Langford is the only member of that committee here. Could you just give us a synopsis of, or speak on behalf of the committee?
Yeah, absolutely. We gathered and we are more than happy to accept Principal Biggs' what's the word? Recommendation, thank you, to name the floor after Al Camino.
Okay. May I have a motion and a second to approve the naming of Roosevelt High School's gym floor after Al Camino?
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion or any other questions or any questions from anyone? Okay, please vote. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, next on the agenda is E6, recommendations for a new 5-year statewide penny plan and expansion of PEPL. This is an information and discussion item, and we have a presentation, so I'll turn it over to Bill Good and the representatives of the Facilities Advisory Committee.
I want to thank the Superintendent's Facilities Advisory Committee. This has been a committee that's been really crucial in ensuring that we have equitable outcomes for all of our facilities around the district, regardless of zip code, since, I think especially since the adoption of the statewide penny, or even prior to the statewide penny, the local option penny. And this is yet again another 5-year plan, and thankfully, we had enough progress by the legislature prior to the conclusion of this work to understand where we were actually going to be with revenue, because as the board knows very, very well, we've been trying to push to get that sunset lifted off the statewide penny for a number of years now. And so that really opened up the doors to have a more robust and fully fleshed out plan as we adopt this new 5-year plan. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you so much for your service to the district. Bill?
Yes, I too want to thank this group. There were some trials and tribulations along the way, but with any good process, you have to work through those, and this group did. And I was very fortunate to be involved with them as their resource. So I think at this particular point, I'm just going to turn it over to, I think Brad is going to start. They're going to introduce themselves and speak to who was on the committee. And there's basically 2 different pieces here. One is the next 5-year plan, and the second is the expansion of PEPL. So turn it over to Brad.
Thank you, Bill. So I'm Brad Titus. I did not chair this effort. I was, an equal co-member. And the other members on the committee were Joel Doyle, Jeff Hall, Mary Lynn Jones, Ed Lineback, Brian Millard, who is here to my right, and Mahogany Palmer, who's to my immediate right, Jeremy Parkey, Jay Peterson, Brad Titus, oh, that's me, yeah, and Dan Twellmeyer. And I'd like to add that Bill Good and Sarah Holland were excellent employees in facilitating our efforts. And I like trials and tribulations because I don't feel that if we don't have trials and tribulations before we come to consensus, and we did both, then we don't get the full value out of the process. So if we can go to slide 2, we'll talk just a bit about that process. So we met in 5 meetings over 6 months, and we trialed and we tribulated. And, the group of people that I listed were very broadly representative of all of our high schools, our middle schools, our grade schools, and our other educational opportunities and facilities that we support here in the Des Moines public school system. All of us came with attendance at a school or 2 or 3 or another, or kids that went to a school or 2 or 3 or another, and with significant personal knowledge of the needs of those institutions that we'd been most associated with. So as you can naturally imagine, it took a while for folks to get away from voicing my needs to hearing your needs to getting to our needs. But over the course of the 6 months in these 5 meetings, we did that. We can go to the next slide. And part of doing that was making a commitment to the district priorities. And we discussed the current district priorities, the priorities that had driven the last go-around of the penny. And after significant discussion, agreed that those were appropriate to drive the new 5-year recommendation for the penny. And those were safety and security, which is paramount. Replacement of obsolete, inefficient, and worn-out equipment and systems, money-saving strategies, improvements to buildings which have not received major improvements. Now, there weren't necessarily a lot of that after the first 5-year plan. Air conditioning classrooms. It seems that unfortunately on the list was not allocating a line item to air conditioning in this room, but improvements to enhance research-based student achievement and program-changing needs. And we went through a list, a long list of potential line items brought from all of the schools, a long list, and wasn't a wish list. Wasn't, a wish list. I mean, this is basic stuff that we need for our kids, for our staff, for our teachers and our administrators in these buildings that, it just isn't getting supplied from as it should for the last 34 years. And so we had to make some really tough choices about allocating $82 million minus 10% for contingencies and inflation against $300 million of real need. Not like to have, want to have, but $300 million in real need. And so it got very serious pretty quick about, this isn't about what's fun, what's flashy. This is about basic core infrastructure. We agreed the current revenue purpose statement, as I said, and that'd be the next slide. And the board directed priorities included in that purpose statement. We reviewed a gabillion line items and pared those down to a tenth of a gabillion line items of HVAC, concrete, flooring, playground safety were the primary items. There were a few opportunities to allocate some money to track renovation at the high schools. But basic infrastructure stuff is what the need was and what we all agreed over our own individual pet projects for any particular school we were associated with. So we put together a 2019, well, the 2019-20 plan is in year 5. So we're now in the final rundown, the final year. We put together a new 5-year plan. We are convinced that the district did administer the last 5-year plan as intended, as designed, to the priorities. And if we can go to the next slide. As I already said, $82 million out of $300 million, that wasn't a wish list. It was serious needs. Infrastructure kind of stuff. And the project plan, as I also already said, includes a 10% for contingency and inflation. So it's a doable plan, a smart plan, a well-constructed plan, put together by a group of citizens that are broadly representative of the entire district. Next slide. 21 to 25 is the net gross, budget per year. It's front-end loaded like the first 5-year plan was. So it starts at 21 million. Last year's 12 million. Total's 82. Next slide. I think I've probably already said everything on this slide. 300 million, 82 million available. This covered our 71 buildings. I believe all of the buildings got something. This was equitable across buildings, across needs, across different populations. This was fully equitable. We debated whether we'd say limited editions or no editions. I can't remember what the editions were, but man, they were small. It's just basic stuff. So we can continue to do things for our students. This does that. It's not great things, but it's good things. The priorities remain the same in terms of equity and the things that we're doing for our students and why we're doing them. So with that, I will turn the second part of the presentation over to Brian. Well, I guess, are there any questions? And if we can't answer them, Mr. Good probably can.
Or
Okay.
we could make something up.
Very good. So I'll turn it over to Brian, and Brian will talk about the PEPL.
Good evening. Thanks for giving some time to speak about this. We've come a long ways. I remember the first penny tax, getting that passed, and then the trouble was figuring out what to do with it, and all the hard work and everything. And then the second penny tax with the 10-year tax with the 5-year vision, and then a second 5-year vision. And I've been very impressed. I mean, we're very lucky to have Bill Good and staff really squeezing out every penny and using it wisely. And our school boards that have, worked on this along the way. So my hat's off to everybody. So PEPL. So the physical plant and equipment levy, you're all familiar with. It pays for hard goods, roofing, building repairs, School buses are included in that. Any more technology, emergency needs, and security. So PEPL is usually used intensely as much as we have for key things that are purposely targeted as the only things that we can use that money for. The history of providing basic maintenance needs based on executing the 5-year plan and with the current levy expiring in 2021. So we have to be thinking about this real hard. So the projected additional revenue that if we did an increase would be $6 million. If you can go to the next slide, it'll show what the neighboring districts. If you take a look at this, this was a huge surprise that all the districts, including if you go down to Southeast Polk, they've now approved it, and theirs will raise to 1.34 in September. We're at 0.63. This levy targets key things that we as a district ourselves need a lot of help with. Now, it's not going to be easy to get this passed. A lot of people will vote no for anything, but the more that we can educate people as this is coming forward on the needs, especially people that are actively involved with the school district, parents, neighborhood residents, things like that, on the importance of it, but also because of the posture and the positioning of the district, it's unlikely that there'll be any type of millage rate increase unless something occurs that we don't have any power over. By lowering our cash reserve levy and or the management fund levy to meet a specific need, we remain solvent with those. And with the increases from the projected PEPL, we can take care of a lot more things. We've got a big budget shortfall. We have a lot of needs, and with a strong PEPL, it helps us get to where we need to go. You know, if I won the big Powerball, I'd joked that I'd buy a high school for you guys. But there's a lot of things we probably need before that. So, you know, we can always be looking for that pot of gold, but I believe that the way the Des Moines School District has acted and reacted along the way with the first and second penny tax, that we're in a strong position to be able to stand and speak about our successes, how we can be trusted, and what we need for the future. So with that, I, for one, will be glad to volunteer to try to help get PEPL passed. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for your service on this committee.
Yes.
Board questions? Mr. Barron.
Yeah, a few. First of all, I want to thank you all and your colleagues on the committee. And I don't necessarily direct my questions to you. I'll start with Tom, and perhaps Bill wants to chime in on these. But I do really appreciate you. I know, at least I know, Brian, you've been on this multiple times, and a little while, yeah. And I apologize if the two of you have as well. But I really appreciate the service here, because this is a process that needs to be informed by the community, and it's no easy task to commit to monthly meetings for 6 months to do this and to wade through a lot of things. And I appreciate the perspective that you all take, which I think is well informed by stuff that we see every day, which is we don't have the resources to do everything that we want to do. We don't have the resources to do everything we need to do. So we make choices. And it's helpful to have more folks in the community who are informed of that reality and who are willing to devote yourselves to try and help us figure out what's the right thing to do. So I very much appreciate that. Now, I had a couple questions. One, I just want to point out, so, looking over the project list for the next 5 years, we're not at a point where we're looking at expanding services. So, in prior years, we've expanded onto buildings using in the prior 5-year plan. that's not in the offing going forward. My question on that is are we confident in, as confident as we can be, that we won't need additional space? And so, I mean, I was looking, and I know we've expanded Perkins in the past, and it didn't look like maybe that was in the last 5-year plan, but Stowe was, and there were other buildings that we've expanded. Are we confident we're not going to need additional space in the next 5 years?
No. However, we're confident that in this plan, we can accommodate what it is that we will need. So there was a 10% allowance in there.
Yeah.
Part of that is for the same reason that we front load the plan, so that we're getting the best economic value out of these dollars. We can spend now, we save the cost increase. You know, they're existing needs now, so the sooner we can meet them, the better. But we have an allowance in there for a few different reasons. One is just changing needs, changes in the city, changes to the student population that can't fully be predicted 5 years out. So that's part of that allowance. And then the other part is sometimes we have unanticipated increases in costs for particular projects. When you look at, it was like $330 million in projects that we were trying to narrow down to 82.3. Those are real needs, but they aren't exactly real numbers. You know, all these things are estimates on what's this going to cost, what's this going to cost. Are we going to run into an unanticipated issue if we try to add on to this building? Are we going to discover asbestos somewhere? You know, there's a 1,000 different variables. So the reason that cushion is in there is partly for that. We're trying, but we can't foresee everything. And then part of it is for the inflation. And that has worked well. We've actually, over the last 5-year plan, the current 5-year plan, we're in year 5 now, there have been a few times when we've had additions that weren't specifically stated in the plan that we've been able to accommodate through that allowance, sort of that cushion, if you will. I don't know if that completely answers your question, and Bill, you may want to expand on that.
Yeah, you know, based upon the committee and board and the superintendent's and the community's interests, we hit that last 5-year plan really hard. As far as additions go, we were able to create a lot of equity between buildings. We went from cafetorium to gymnasiums, or, you know, whatever you want to call them, just like at Howe this year. You know, they now have a real gym that they're going to start the school year as a result of this plan. They had kind of a cracker box gym cafeteria. So from an addition standpoint, we've added quite a few classrooms, and we've added a lot of square footage for our students.
And Bill, something I try to remind people of all the time, because you've done an amazing job of this, but part of what's lost in that last 5-year plan is the eradication of temporary classrooms. So although we've done brick and mortar additions, in many cases, those were to replace the
Trailers.
trailers. Yeah, thank you. I was trying to think of a politic way to say that, but yeah, trailers that compromise safety, that compromise health conditions, the whole nine. So although it is new brick and mortar, it wasn't net new classroom space in many regards. Because I think we've reduced 40 portables in the last 35.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I would add to all of that, when you talk about the future, I'm often one that anybody that can predict longer than 5 years, I question. And something could happen. There could be some growth. I think that with the future of the statewide penny and the potential bonding ahead, that we're going to be able to react to that in the future beyond this 5-year plan. So I think we're postured for that. I know Dr. Ahart has asked that we look at updating our demographic study so we can best do our best to try and predict that future. So we'll be monitoring. When we need it, we'll be there, and with the ability to provide those opportunities just like we have in the past.
Yeah, and one other note I would make is, some of you were on the board at the time, but about 5 years ago, we did a pretty significant redrawing of boundaries from elementary all the way through secondary. And we made the commitment at that time that every 2 years, we would look at elementary one year and the next year look at secondary. And we've made, as you're all aware, some minor adjustments to boundaries. We continue to do that, and part of that effort is to ensure that we're fully utilizing our physical plant, and having the best conditions that we can for students. Although it's not often perceived that way if you happen to be a family impacted by that. But that's been a real effort to make sure that we don't, wait a couple of decades and then have to do a major readjustment, so that we're investing in buildings and putting in additions where we're pretty confident long-term the need is going to remain.
Well, I guess the next question I would ask is, so I certainly understand, and I think you all spoken to us about increasing the PEPL levy, and I think that I doubt that you'd find any opposition to that. But if one of the reasons is to reduce budgetary shortfall over the coming years, wouldn't then offsetting that increase with a decrease in management levy or cash reserve, wouldn't that, at least with management levy, wouldn't that work against us lowering that 3-year budget shortfall? I mean, we're adding revenue, but then we're also simultaneously proposing to cut revenue at the same time.
And revenues that can't be used for the same thing.
Correct. And I understand that the PEPL is probably more useful than cash reserve or management would be to us. But
Yeah, so for cash reserve, we're not at a point where we feel like the cash reserve needs replenishing. So we don't feel like if we continue at the current rate, that's something that's going to be a net benefit for us. In the very long run, it could be, but it's something that we could respond to a couple of decades down the road. So making that, and we don't have that completely spelled out where, how much cash levy and how much management levy, but we are confident that we can lower those in some combination, mostly cash reserve levy, and I'll let Nick weigh in on this as well, and then shift. What happens with PEPL is we have much more flexibility in capturing some costs that are now general fund, that wouldn't be creative add-ons. They would just be standard fare, in this case technology, to the tune of $6 to $7 million annually over the life of the next 5-year plan. That creates that much more space in our spending authority in the general fund. So, and I'll let Nick get down to the more of the brass tacks on the management and cash reserve levy.
Yeah, so the management levy itself, the fund balance, as you guys had alluded to, solvent. The cash reserve component is what helps us drive our solvency ratio. And if you remember from a budgetary component, the deficit that we're in is all driven based upon spending authority. And this is where the wonkiness of spending authority kind of starts to raise its head, where management fund and cash reserve levy really don't have a tremendous amount of impact on those spending authorities. So really what we're talking about is shifting what's currently in the general fund, about $6.6 million, and moving that over into the PEPL fund, which will directly positively impact our spending authority. And we don't necessarily have a dire need right now for the additional management fund revenue or the additional cash reserve revenue. More likely than not, it will come from the cash reserve component, because management fund's largely driven towards settlements, early retirements, and things like that. So that kind of continues on. But
yeah, and the other point, if you can recall the slides that talked about our that Nick has shared several times, that talk about our financial outlook and our current status and the board targets. And we ended this year really above in a solvency ratio perspective, really above where the board target is.
And we
About
will
15.
continue to be,
Yeah.
we'll be at 21, 22% over these next few years, while also having a deficit because of the wonkiness of how spending authority works.
So that'll help bring those two closer together, and both of them closer to the board target of 15.
and is the ask to the community going to be to raise it to 1.34, or have we not determined the appropriate level yet?
We want to go
is
max.
to move it to 1.34 and then reduce other levies at the same amount. So the net impact on the property tax rate would be neutral.
Yes.
And refresh my memory that we can, in the annual budgetary process, we can raise or lower cash reserve and management. Is that right?
The two components that we have control over are the cash reserve and the management levy. Everything else is largely formulaic, and driven along those lines. So, and that's our plan here. The toughest part about all of this, and these guys did a wonderful job alluding to it, is convincing people that we are going to hold taxes flat before we actually have an opportunity to hold taxes flat. And that's why that's the big lift here when you're talking about the tax rates.
But I think as Brian eloquently stated, I think the track record that the district has over the last 9 years
Yes.
of the statewide penny cannot be matched by anyone else in the state. And when we can talk about, and which we can with real facts, on cost avoidance, especially in terms of energy consumption while improving learning conditions, with, air conditioning's off the list because we're all air conditioned and we're still using less energy. And we have an extremely good track record, and we don't have the bells and whistles that, they did not have to strike off indoor football practice facility from the list of that $330 million list, because that wasn't on there. We're talking about doing things that are oftentimes in smaller districts and urban districts avoided, things like tuck pointing, which are not sexy, window replacement, keeping up with roofs, keeping up with HVAC, and especially in our case, we've made a huge investment in geothermal, and that needs constant maintenance to continue to operate as intended. And we're determined to stay on top of those things so we don't have a building backlog of deferred maintenance that are going to cause issues for us well beyond those of us at this table not being here.
So I'm not going to ask for a response on this one because I don't really want to monopolize the conversation, and I like short board meetings.
All right, then.
But one of those things that I know was on the list, and I saw that you all got a presentation on early childhood, on our preschool, and you and I have had this conversation, and that was one of the things I was hoping to see in this plan, because as I'm going hat in hand to just about everybody I know right now to raise money for this classroom, people ask me, okay, what's next? How do we do more? And I explained to them that part of the problem is we don't have the money for the teacher, for the associate, for the supplies. But the other part is we have to have the space. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have the space, then not having the money is irrelevant. You have to have both. And that we're fortunate that we have the space right here, but this is a one-time thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm not necessarily looking for a response on this. I'm just looking to put a marker down on this conversation and to continue this, because I want to know how we can increase our preschool capacity in years forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a presentation as one of our meetings with about early childhood also. There's a deep understanding of the importance of early childhood, not only at the board table, but in the committee, and it's pretty widespread in our community. I believe that we're in position to react from a space standpoint when it can become a reality as far as the funding for the programming. Again, this is just about space. Mm-hmm. Creating the needed dollars for the programming has to come from somewhere else. But when it does, I believe that we're postured to be able to react to that in a very positive way. Again, there's not a question about the belief in early childhood and the value to our students and our families in that regard. So we know that, and we'll be ready for it.
And we had that conversation in open meeting with all of the committee members, and we came to the conclusion that we believe, Bill, that is an accurate statement. And so when funding is available for the program, we certainly want the program and believe that Bill has space available for it. That Des Moines Public Schools has space available for it when it is funded.
Any other question? Terry? Sorry, Mr. Barron. I agree that I love short meetings as well, but I do have a couple of follow-up questions. Thank you all for your work. I always appreciate the opportunity we have to hear from our citizens, especially on projects like this, because we don't always all have the answers, and having the ability to have our community weigh in, I think, really informs our decisions, so thank you. Two quick things, actually three. When was the last time we did a demographic study?
It's 5 to 6 years old.
Okay. And I don't know the frequency of those, or if we are going to do another one anytime soon.
Yes, as I mentioned, Dr. Ahart is very interested in that, and that is on the radar.
Okay.
to do
We're
another
actively
one.
looking, Terry, for a firm that has a track record for doing, I don't want to say that our last ones were not meaningful, but a more meaningful study in an urban environment. We're talking with colleagues around the country to see if we can get some recommendations for folks that could really come in and give us some evidence that what they can give us is going to be meaningful for us from a planning perspective, because frankly, the last two that we've done have added little value to what the state projections are. And we need better information.
Okay,
Yeah, I
good.
just might add to that, I don't know if we've had a chance, we cross in the night, it seems like every now and then. But we're going to be doing RFI to see what's out there and then maybe build up an RFP after that. So
Okay.
we're working on the RFI now.
Perfect. I know in the past, that's really helped to sort of inform some of the decisions about building expansions, new schools, et cetera. So thank you for that. And then my other question, actually two, I think that it would be really helpful to better understand some of the specifics that are embedded in the 5-year plan to really help us figure out how we use Pebble to enhance our ability to advance those projects, because I know in the past they've sort of have gone hand in hand. One complements the other in terms of our ability to do projects, especially around technology, et cetera, without having to take regular statewide penny dollars to do some of those. So being able to understand and see those specifics would be helpful. And then my third question really sort of goes to the schedule for a ballot measure, to the extent that that's the direction that we want to go. Any thoughts about when that may be placed on the ballot? Yet this fall, next year? What are you thinking?
It's embedded within that presentation, potential
it?
schedule. Yes, there's a,
Oh, there we go. Oh, that's the last one. Okay.
yeah, this is far from our complete communications plan to move this forward, but these are general benchmarks. One certainly directly associated with the school board.
So yet this fall then? Okay.
Yes.
That's quick. Lots of work ahead. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Langford?
Oh, can you hear me? Pardon my allergies. I'm looking at the extension timeline, and I'm just wondering if there's a plan to educate the community on this issue, like we've done with budget. And I see taxpayer association meeting. I see informational meetings with staff. I don't really see any. Oh, yep. Never mind. Community meetings.
Yeah, there's a much more robust plan that's in the works right now that we can't fully flesh out right now, but where Phil and Bill and I are actively working on that at present.
When did we go to the current levy?
I'm sorry?
When did we go to the current levy? I feel like it's happened since I've been on this board.
I think that was in the presentation too. When the current levy, it's
Oh, expires in 2021. Nope, it's
yeah.
okay. It's all right.
I don't have that.
10-year? Okay, yeah, it's been since
We
I've been
can
here.
get you that date.
It's okay,
Yeah.
So it must have been 09,
yeah.
or, no, I'm sorry, 11.
11? Thank you.
Any other questions? If I'm thinking correctly, the plan itself, the board doesn't vote on, but we will
Vote on the ballot
have
measure.
individual things brought to us as they
Right,
come forward.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially regarding the actual change to the levy.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is the board work plan, and this is some of the work that we've committed to doing as part of our governance process and accountability. I'm not going to go through this too in depth but if anybody else has any questions, concerns, or things that they want highlighted, I know that City Council School Board meeting is still out there in the works, and
I have a meeting with the mayor on Thursday. I'll ask him about it.
okay.
Who might have any insight? What's the likelihood of that happening before the election?
Right, and that, I think it would need to be planned sooner, very quickly, if it was going to happen before the election, right? Election's November 5th.
It could happen.
It could happen.
It could happen.
But I think that any dates that we want to schedule need to be looked for now in order for it
Right.
to happen
Right.
before then, because with that many people.
I have one thing on the work plan.
Okay. Terry, you have?
Sure. So I know that we're going to be doing process mapping later, but I thought I would just pass around the results of the external monitoring. And on the front are all of the topics that were advanced for individuals' review. And on the back, I took an attempt at sort of compiling based on individual rankings, sort of what our number 1, number 2, 3, 4, and 5 external monitoring topics might be, and we can have additional discussion. But based on the feedback, the number 1 topic for external monitoring is treatment of students. Number 2, treatment of staff. Number 3, SRG. Number 4, not schools of Roger, schools of rigor, and then overall academic achievement. So that's sort of how the tallying came up based on the feedback that I received from board members. So we can decide how we want to move forward with that, but.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that, or is this a discussion that we want to schedule for another time?
I mean, this seems to align with personally what I would want to look at if the board,
So okay. And
in terms of our top 3 priorities. Top 4.
so SRG is not a board, we do not have a board policy around SRG.
Isn't this for external monitoring?
Schools for
though?
rigor, we don't have a policy around that. What was that?
Would we need to for external monitoring?
Yeah, external monitoring is still regarding our governance policy. And so it would be around management limitations and student expectations.
But for 1 and 2, we do.
Yeah.
So we could.
I was going to offer that oftentimes in our presentations, we're getting a lot of feedback and a lot of reference on SRG and also schools of rigor and how they fit into overall academic achievement, how we're monitoring, those sorts of things. So I'm wondering if there's a space for us to sort of use that as a point of reference for how we might at least get a sense of the efficacy with which those things are being implemented and how they inform overall student achievement and or treatment of students.
So here's my thought, is that if to me, this could be another subcommittee or something like that for people to work on what this next step or
Looks
what
like.
might look like, and how this would play out, and if it would be. I think we need to have solid rationale behind triggering external monitoring, and so coming up with whatever that is, aside from just our ranking, but using the ranking as the starting point to do that, and then what that would look like and what that would entail.
I'd be willing to serve on a committee.
Okay.
I would work on it.
I can.
Okay, so Bradley, Langford, and Caldwell Johnson. And who wants to, Terry, do you want to
Sure.
lead that up? And then I guess you
We'll
guys
come
can
up with
create
something.
the
Yep.
timeline and for when you might have that back and
Right.
let us know.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you. And thank you for putting this together, Terry. Okay. Other items on the, like Terry mentioned, we're going to talk about the process mapping in our work session. Seemed like there was the community workshop for the 2019 election. We are planning on the 10th of August. So we do need to start getting that organized as far as getting word out and registration and all of those types of things. So I'm not sure if that's something that we need to, at this point, turn over to Phil to start, or to the communications department to start putting together a PR work, and then I know Terry, Kirsten, and I are already on a subcommittee. We could, and next board is planning to come and give their presentation, but I suppose hammering out any additional details and things needed.
Yep.
Who's chairing that? Just so I can connect Phil with.
Yeah, you can put me down. Is there anything else on that part?
You all need help day of.
Okay, probably.
Love to,
Yeah,
support in that.
I mean, I would guess anybody who can be there, especially those not.
So I want to make sure. So with Deanna's announcement, that vacancy then is made available for the remaining 2 years in the election process.
Yes.
So there's really nothing else that we have to do beyond making sure that people know that that particular district seat is sort of a little out of sequence and is now open. I think it's really important that we underscore that as part of sort of the larger process, because I think all things being equal, that could sort of get lost in the shuffle. So,
Yep,
yeah.
I agree.
And that people realize it's a 2-year term and
2-year
all of those things
commitment.
that,
And to make sure that all the formalities, I believe you emailed Drew about the formality and that around timing and that.
Yeah, just because another board member did have a question about that, we're good to go in terms of, there was a question raised at the board table if I could serve out the remainder of my term until after the election, and legal came back and said that that actually is a really smart and probably strategic way to move forward, and that we're well within our legal limits to do that. I'm well within my legal limits to do that.
Okay.
so your resignation would be effective after the election. Gotcha.
So I suspect you still need to submit to the board chair and acting board secretary something in writing stating that you're resigning effective that date, and probably sooner than later to make sure that we're within the number of days to allow for the election to cover that. Awesome. Thank you for bringing that up. And then otherwise, I think anything else we can cover, if there's anything else we need to cover, we can do so in our work session around the work plan, but I think those were probably the highlights. Anybody else have anything else regarding work plan items? Okay. Then on the agenda, there's information-only items for your review: preliminary plans for East High School football and track reconstruction, notification of award of competitive quotes and bids, and Head Start Committee meeting minutes. And then next are items of privilege, and I'm just going to mention that our next board meeting is August 13th, and that's the only meeting in August. And then again, with the school board election, it is November 5th this year, which is different than past. It's been in the September before. Just so everyone is aware, I know everyone at this table is aware, but for the community, seats open are mine at large, and I will not be running again. Ms. Anderson for District 1, Ms. Bradley for District 3, and Ms. Langford for District 2 for the remaining 2 years of her term. Filing begins August 26th and ends on September 19th. So that's not all that far away. So hopefully folks are thinking about filing nomination papers. This is an important job, and that community meeting on the 10th is a workshop for candidates and anyone else in the community to come learn about what the school board does, what our role is, about student outcomes focused governance, which is what this board has committed to and set goals around. And so hopefully we'll have good attendance around that workshop as well. Do any other board members have any comments or anything to share?
I was just going to add that when individuals are filing, especially for district seats,
Yes.
signatures are from individuals in the district, not individuals in the community. Important distinction.
Yep. Thank you. Anybody else have any other comments or things to share? Okay, I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
This may sound like a strange thing to bring up. We have presidential candidates all over the state and in and out of Des Moines, and we should be trying to take advantage of that. We have some things going on that are hopefully going to engender some conversations over the next couple of months. But what I really want to remind people of is we are almost 5 months away from the start of the 2020 Iowa State legislative session. And the work that happens beginning in January when the session kicks off is largely determined by what happens between now and when the legislative session starts. So I will be proposing recommended district legislative priorities to our board next month. But in the meantime, then you will not see a dramatic difference from what's been recommended in the past few years. We all know what's important. We all know where the needs are. And these what seem to be quiet summer months can be some very impactful times in having personal conversations with our legislators and helping them decide where they're going to invest their time and energy and political clout when the session starts in January. So I just want to remind everybody, it's obvious, it should be obvious that our participation at the voting booth is hugely important, but to make those votes count and do more good, we can really grease the skids in this interim time between now and election time and between now and the kickoff of the legislative session. So just encourage people to continue to make touches with your legislators and make sure they understand what's important to you. That's all I have.
Thank you. With that, I will adjourn the meeting and we will have a work session very shortly.